In the modern age of Hollywood, we have seen many artists caught in personal struggles, trying to balance the extraordinary demands of their work with their own journeys. Today, we are going to discuss this complicated subject with some very special members of our festival family. We will begin with introductions of our guests, followed by a moderated discussion, and then answering some questions from you. The ushers have distributed note cards, so jot down a question, and then we will come and collect them at a suitable time. For those in our live stream audience, you can jot a question down in the conversation feed, and we'll do our best to get to them when we can. I also wanted to mention, before we begin, that Mary Walsh sends her deepest regrets and wishes she could be here today with us. I'm very pleased to introduce our guests today. I would ask that you hold your applause until the end because you are going to want to applaud. Steve Ross is an award-winning actor who has graced stages across North America. 2018 marks his 15th season at the festival, appearing as Mayor Shin in The Music Man and as the unforgettable and tantalizing narrator in The Rocky Horror Show. David Goldbloom is a psychiatrist and a senior medical advisor at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. He is a past chair of the Board of Governors of the Stratford Festival and is an officer of the Order of Canada. He is also the president and treasurer for the Steve Ross Fan Club Metro Toronto Division. Our guide on this journey today is Janine Pearson, who in her 27th season at the Stratford Festival serves as the head of voice and coaching. She has taught in post-secondary institutions across the nation, and she has been a voice, text, and dialect coach for theater and film and television. And she is also a big fan of Steve Ross.
Goodness gracious, it's too much pressure.
Please join me in a round of applause for our guests today.
So as Julie said, good morning and welcome. So I thought we were just going to start. David is going to do a little presentation for us, which is going to be wonderful. But before we head into that, I thought it would just be great if everybody could speak individually to their connection to the topic today. Why specifically are they here? So David, why are you here?
First of all, I received an invitation, and I don't habitually walk onto the stage of the studio theater without being asked. But I'm really here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for a long and abiding love for this festival and its people. Secondly, because I've always been intrigued by the intersect between creativity, mental health, and at times mental illness, and how they affect each other. And third, because in the course of my clinical career, I've had opportunity to assess and work with a variety of people from creative as well as non-creative works, jobs really, and to try to understand the impact and the intersect when mental illness rears its head on their ability to function and to be creative in ways that are productive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Steve.
I am a fan of both of these as well. It's a lot of pressure having a fan club. I didn't know I had one. And I didn't know I was tantalizing, so that was right off the bat.
But we've been selling those T-shirts. We just haven't told you.
I should have worn my own T-shirt. Yes.
Yeah.
I sort of get asked and do what I'm told as an actor here at the Stratford Festival. But I have a lot of I have a fair amount of personal experience with this sort of thing. Depression and bipolar and that kind of thing runs in my family, and I've always been extremely interested in it. Janine and I have had long talks, and we've got a bit of a history with trying some sort of an initiative here. The Good Doctor has been a big part of it as well. We became pals a while back, several years ago, I guess. But he's such a wealth of knowledge, and I just kind of jumped at the chance to be a part of this discussion.
And my role at the festival, as Julie said, is I'm head of voice and coaching. And I coordinate a team of specialty coaches who work with the actors, serving the plays, serving the directors. And it's a privilege to do that. As a coach, I would consider, you have an area of specialty. So my area is voice. But as a coach here, you're looking at the whole performance aspect of coaching. I often, refer to the actors as thoroughbreds, or as Olympians, because indeed that's what they are. They are at the top of their game. And just like any beautiful thoroughbred at the top of its game, or an Olympian at the top of their game, you're looking not just as their physical self or their vocal self, but you're looking at their emotional, mental health as well. And that, for me, that is as much part of the journey for the artist as, you know, whether they are in good shape physically, whether they have a good instrument vocally. It's performances where all of those things come together and all of those things meet. So mental health is a huge part of that for anyone. There's a lot of pressure for an Olympian. There's a lot of pressure. I mean, in my affectionate moments, I like to refer to this place as the Stratford Stress-Filled Festival. Because you imagine that our company is, you know, these are actors at the top of their game, actors, dancers, singers at the top of their game. They're doing 3 productions at once. So, you know, they're not doing 1 play 8 times a week, they're doing 3 plays. And the demands of those plays in terms of the characters and the physical demands, the vocal demands, the demands of the spaces are very, very real and significant in their work, and as they, you know, produce the beautiful, beautiful theater that you witness. So that's my connection to this. I take that, as I say, I take that as very, very seriously, and it's a part of every artist's journey, that part, not just the physical part, but also the emotional and mental part as well. So now I know that David, you know, he travels the world doing talks on mental health, and we asked him today if he would do a short presentation for us. So I don't know, for those of you on the extreme side, we have a screen here, so I don't know if you can actually see that. If you can't, you're welcome to move over a little bit. I think, you know, I'll either crook my head like this or come and sit in the center step, I don't know. So I'm going to pass it over to David now.
Thank you. I did prepare some remarks, so bear with me. This is really designed more to catalyze the discussion that's going to follow, as well as to provide you with some information. So you see here, we've got our, there we go. I don't mind telling you that Steve's agent had some pretty strict requirements about the signage for today's presentation. And we are, to some extent, impoverished by the absence of Mary Walsh. Mary is a very staunch advocate for the cause of mental health, and I've had the occasion in the past to do some fundraising events with her. This is the only picture I have of the two of us together. And although she's smiling, you could actually hear her saying, "I am never working with this clown again." And that was 2 years ago. She also told me to lose the beard. Now, which I did. I want to start with paying homage to somebody who had a long and interesting affiliation with the Stratford Festival in the 1960s. And the music you're hearing, of course, is the opening aria of the Goldberg variations of Bach that Glenn Gould championed in 1955 with his groundbreaking recording. Groundbreaking is the word I really meant. And Glenn Gould was a creative genius of the keyboard, perhaps the greatest pianist of the 20th century, as well as being in charge of music here at the Stratford Festival in the 1960s when there was a robust classical music program happening here. And he has been the subject of endless speculation about his psychiatric status, his emotional well-being, his relationships. And I have to say, this type of psychological autopsy runs the risk for me of sapping the absolute pleasure and joy out of listening to Gould as a pianist. But I will come back to the issue of Glenn Gould because it does relate to our discussion. Now, this face may look a little less familiar to you. This is the face of Robert Schumann, one of the great composers in a previous century. And the thing about Robert Schumann is that he suffered from severe bipolar disorder. He died young in an asylum where he spent the last few years of his life. And he embodies for me the lack of romance about the linkage between mental illness and the creative process. Because although Schumann was a spectacular composer, when his illness was in full flower, it disabled him and prevented him from doing the work of which he was capable. And I can commend to you an extraordinary German film from 2008 called Geliebte Clara, about the relationship between Clara Schumann, his wife, a young Johannes Brahms, and Robert Schumann. And it paints in a very unadorned way the picture of the relationship between mental illness and creativity. So let me start by defining some terms here for this discussion. Firstly, in terms of talking about the mind and the brain is, as we know, a kind of chemical soup, a highly elaborated network involving hundreds of billions of connections between cells. And the firing of those are what allows Steve to be on stage, performance after performance in multiple roles, doing what he does so well. The mind is something we can't quite localize on an MRI. It is the internal workings of the brain. And then when it comes to creativity, it's also kind of hard to define. Now, for many of us, like pornography, we know it when we see it, so that we do have a sense of what creativity is, but that definition varies from person to person, whether we're looking at what we think are the brilliant paintings by our children or watching great stage performances. Some people have tried to define creativity, and Nancy Andreasen, who's a very skilled psychiatrist as well as a scholar on James Joyce, defined it as the capacity to see something new that others could not. And I have to tell you, I've had that experience standing next to an architect who was designing a new hospital for us in Toronto. And he was a very cool architect, dressed in black and living in the annex. And he would look out a window onto an open field like that. And so I would stand next to him and assume the same pose and look out into the same field. But somehow I knew he was seeing something that I simply could not see. And so that definition worked for me. Ibsen, a great playwright, described it as the spark of the divine fire. And hopefully we'll get a sense from Steve of what his creative process involves. Now, what are the things that we need to be creative? And people have given a lot of thought to what are those elements that make creativity happen. Well, intelligence broadly defined, although many intelligent people are not particularly creative. Imagination, motivation, solitude is pretty essential for most people engaged in the creative process. Incentive, for Beethoven, it was sometimes financial. He needed to make a living, same for Hemingway. And indeed, in the semi-successful musical Merrily We Roll Along, which Steve will know from the Sondheim canon, it's the story of a composer and a lyricist, and they're being interviewed, and somebody asks them the inevitable question that is asked of all composers and lyricists: which comes first, the words or the music? And they answer in unison, the contract. So let's consider for a moment, in the wake of last week's wonderful opening of Julius Caesar, one of the most successful and prolific and memorable playwrights of all time. I'm speaking, of course, of Neil Simon. Now, Neil Simon had the mixed fortune of sitting on an airplane next to a psychiatrist who is interested in creativity. And so she used the long flight to interview him about his creative process. And she distilled it down to a couple of statements. As he described how he worked, he said, number one, I slip into a state that's apart from reality. In other words, he had a capacity to focus intensely, to kind of disconnect, and to get to a remote and transcendent place where he came up with his plays. He said, I don't write consciously. It's as if the muse sits on my shoulder. In other words, that his creative process couldn't simply be consciously willed into existence. And he said he, in fact, never knows how his plays are going to end until he approaches the ending of so far more than 30 plays. He noted in reflecting on himself, my mind wanders even when I talk. And that is an altered filtering mechanism that leads to heightened perception, greater sensitivity to stimuli, and increased intensity of experience generally when you have that capacity. And the corollary to it is, he said, I always feel as if I'm invisible. And that allows him to be an observer as much as a participant. Let me shift now to a composer. And this is a composer who Glenn Gould famously said didn't die too young, but rather lived too long. And he was referring to Mozart, because he felt that Mozart's last compositions were not worthy of his early compositions. And we have Mozart's own description of his creative process from his diaries and letters. And it's really extraordinary to read how he described his creativity. He says, when I am, as it were, completely in myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, say traveling in a carriage or walking after a good meal, or during the night when I cannot sleep. It is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come I know not, nor can I force them. All this fires my soul, and provided I'm not disturbed, my subject enlarges itself, becomes methodized and defined, and in the whole, though it be long, stands almost complete and finished in my mind, so that I can survey it like a fine picture or a beautiful statue at a glance. Nor do I hear in my imagination the parts successively, but I hear them, as it were, all at once. What a delight this is, I cannot tell. And then he basically jots it down. And he says, in fact, for this reason, the committing to paper is quickly done, for everything is, as I have said before, already finished, and it rarely differs on paper from what was in my imagination. So you can imagine why Salieri found him so annoying. Right? Any working stiff composer would find this level of inspiration rather discouraging. But if we hurtle forward into the 20th century, we come to, again, another highly prolific composer, and not the happiest of human beings, Richard Rodgers, who was in fact hospitalized several times for quite debilitating depression. But he had a gift. Now, he was not quite as soaring and articulate as Mozart in describing his gift. He reduced it to 4 words. He said, I can pee melody. And as you know, he had a fairly steady stream with 2 partners. Now, of course, this brings us to Shakespeare and brings me closer to the topic of mental health and creativity. And of course, as you know, all of us in this audience who care so deeply about the works of Shakespeare know that he had a profound influence on how we perceive the inner lives of people, using the theater to tell the why of human stories in a way that really hadn't been done so much before. The first book on mental illness published in the English language, called A Treatise on Melancholy, appeared in 1586, 3 years before he writes his first play. Now, of course, we have no idea if Shakespeare read the book, right? And all the biographies say he may well have, or it's possible that he, in describing anything that occurred in his time. And the word suicide was coined after he died. However, there are more than a dozen suicides in the plays of Shakespeare. And so this takes me into the subject of creativity and mental illness specifically. And I want to keep an eye on the time so that I'm going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. Would that be?
That's perfect.
Okay, all right. So Lord Byron summed it up. He said, "We of the craft are all crazy. Some are touched by gaiety, others by melancholy, but we are all touched." And as you know, Lord Byron himself touched a lot of people. The list of composers who've been affected by various types of mental illness is long. Berlioz, Bruckner, Elgar, Handel, Ives, Rachmaninoff, who of course dedicated his second piano concerto to the psychotherapist who brought him out of a deep depression, Rossini, Schumann, and others. And John Dryden said that great wits are sure to madness near allied, and thin partitions to their bounds divide. But of course, we leave it to Shakespeare, who summarizes it so succinctly in "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact." We have now, in the late 20th and early 21st century, evidence of some kind of linkage, particularly between bipolar disorder and creativity. But it is not the romantic connection that is so often imagined. And you know, the 19th century image of the manic poet or opera composer in a garret, staying awake for days, churning out masterpieces, is a truly romantic notion. And for most people in the creative professions, when mental illness rears its head, it constitutes a break in the creative process rather than an accelerant towards a useful creative product. What's intriguing is that we have large data sets that I can't go into right now from Scandinavia, involving many hundreds of thousands of people to drill down on this issue of the connection between things like bipolar disorder and creativity. And looking at the creative class, if you will, and there are ways of defining creative occupations. What they find is, first of all, that creative people are likely to have first, second, and third degree relatives who are also creative. But they're also likely to have bipolar disorder themselves and in first, second, and third degree relatives. So that there is some linkage there, but the evidence would clearly suggest that if you do not experience the full flowering of a major mental illness, that's actually an advantage towards your creativity. That a bit of it may help you in terms of your creativity, but the full expression of it is going to be more of a hindrance. Now, there's a lot more to say about this, but I think I want to make sure that there's ample time both for your questions and for my fellow panelists. I want to close by quoting another scholar in this area, Kay Jamieson, who made the point very plainly that most people who are creative do not have a mental illness, and most people who have a mental illness are not unusually creative. So the takeaway is, let's not trivialize the impact of mental illness on the person, the family, the society, and our culture. Let's remember that we're better at treating mental illness than we are at bottling creativity. And also that when people's mental health is optimized, that actually helps let creativity out of the bottle. So I'll stop there, and then hopefully we'll have a chance for more discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I certainly would say from a coach's perspective, walking alongside different artists who have, traveled journeys where it's been sometimes more difficult, one of the things that they're often concerned about is if I level out, if I become a little bit healthier, I won't be as creative. And part of the journey for them is learning actually that, just what you're finishing with, and that's actually not true.
Right.
That they're much more fruitful, much more creative, much more able to meet the work when they are in a healthier place, as opposed to riding a high wave or a very, very deep, dark wave.
But the romantic idea persists, right? That this is a semi-divine moment of inspiration that will take you to heights. And I've seen people taken to heights by mental illness, but when they look back on the experience afterward, they say, that wasn't me, or what I thought was genius inspiration is not the case.
Yeah, Rachmaninoff was not writing that concerto in the depth of that depression. He was dedicating it to his
that's right.
psychiatrist because he was out of the depression and able to pen that. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
It doesn't seem like a sustainable thing either. It seems perhaps, yes, it does occur as genius in the moment, but for something, I can only speak for myself who does these long contracts and stuff, there's no way, I don't see, to sustain that kind of creativity if people are calling it that. I don't know. It's a really vulnerable thing, the rehearsal process and the creating process. But I remember speaking to one actress who was playing Medea one year brilliantly, Shauna McKenna. I don't think and I asked her point blank. I was young and dumb enough to just think that all my questions were interesting at that point. But I just
now you're just older.
Now I'm just older and really boring. So if you guys want to clear out, that's fine. But I just asked her point blank, how can you possibly enter the stage of a 90-minute or 100-minute play, enter the stage sobbing, and not stop sobbing for 100 minutes. And she said, I've never slept better in my life. I didn't have a fight with my husband the entire time I was doing it.
And he was directing.
I didn't yell at my kids. She said it was the biggest emotional release, and she felt, and she was able to leave it at the theater too, which is a very smart thing. I think that's the other thing that people get trapped into is that as young actors, you want to hold on to that, whatever it is, and you want to take it into your real life too. And we realize how quickly that is not a productive thing. You have to leave the stage door and trust that when you come back the next day, that's what's going to be there again. But that was a real eye opener for me to speak to Shauna about that, because I didn't physically understand how you can portray that to such a deep level and still remain upright as a human being, like walking around town. So,
well, because wouldn't you say? I hear what you're saying about Shauna in that experience, but you yourself, haven't you played some characters where you haven't perhaps slept as well?
True. Yeah.
Or it hasn't been as easy.
Yeah.
There
was the Tommy year where I played a child molester was a big. I didn't know it was going to be a problem, so it was fascinating to do, because I didn't approach it as a problem, because as actors we're not Sorry, go ahead.
So just give a little background to the part that you played in Tommy,
Tommy,
just in case
I
people
played Uncle
didn't.
Ernie, who is the sort of the part of the catalyst for Tommy's journey. He is babysitting Tommy one night, and an incident occurs, and it sort of spirals both of these characters off on their journeys for the rest of their life. That one night has an effect on their life for the rest of it, and it's. I've gotten to play, a presidential assassin, and I've gotten to play a lot of stuff, and it's fascinating because it's not our job as actors to judge the characters, ever. And it's not our job to say, oh, I'm playing a child molester. So the root of the way that myself and Des McAnuff, who directed the show and had directed it prior to that, he was very excited to re-examine it with a different actor and to re-examine the why it happened, and and we came to the conclusion that it was a one-night mistake because of alcohol and because of all of the forces. Whatever happened that night, and that was just a giant mistake. And I remember being interviewed later on, about halfway through the season, and all the interviewer wanted to talk about was how I could perpetuate the stereotype of as a gay man, of child molesters being gay. And I thought, well, I feel like you didn't see the show then, because for one thing, the character's not gay, and it was a mistake. And it took me a long time. And I don't know if the interview actually ever got published, because he was so frustrated with me by the end, because I wouldn't admit to, because he kept saying, how can you play such a monster? And I just thought, well, there's no way to play a monster. All I can do is play what happened on the stage and let you guys make those assumptions. And unfortunately, you guys did make those assumptions, because there were people who would stay around at stage doors specifically to tell me what a terrible person I was. Which was really interesting at first.
And probably a bit stressful.
Oh, it was very interesting. And I went to Des the next day after the first. There was a woman who stayed, and it must have been a solid 20 minutes that she waited outside the stage door to specifically tell me how terrible I was in that show. And I said, now, can I ask you, am I terrible, or was the character terrible? She said, it doesn't matter. You were terrible in that show. And I went to Des the next morning, and I said, so this happened last night. And he said, oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. That's going to happen. So just be okay with that. But it led to, there was a gentleman who really wanted to get into it. He was positive I should be arrested. There was a woman who left at intermission and called Perth County Child Care Services and genuinely said that there was a child being mistreated in this cast. And I came in the next day, and one of our employees here, one of our crew guys here, is the husband of the lawyer who is the representative for Perth County Child Care, and said, so you might be getting a call about some things. But it was fascinating to me that, I guess, and I finally started to stop people and say, now, all I can do is take this as a compliment. You know that, eh? And they would get very angry. A couple times I got through to them. But I said, all I can do is take that as a compliment, because if you've genuinely believed that this has happened on stage, then I'm really good. So, but it is really interesting, and it does take a toll, and you have to, at some point, cut it off in a way. And as I say, you have
What do you mean by that?
Well,
cut it
I think
off?
you have to leave it. You have to leave it in the dressing room. You can't. I can't take it home and start to worry about what is happening and if it's too much, and if it's, all I can do is during that rehearsal process is really take advantage of the director's eye and the coach's eye and people's eyes as we go through it. And once we open that show, that's what we're presenting to people, and there are going to be different reactions. I just found it was kind of a blessing, and it was very freeing that year to say, well, this is what we're presenting, and if we're making that impact, then that's great. But we have to leave it at the stage door, and then trust that when you come back the next day, you have done the work, that you can then recreate that.
Because would you want to say to the audience, as you were trying to say to some of those patrons, I'm doing my job. in the craft of acting, my job is to advocate, is to give voice to this character who is a full human being, who has flaws, who any human being
and I
has
think
flaws.
if you can, I think the older I have gotten, the more interested I am in getting into those skins, in getting into the skin of I did a show called Assassins, which is a fantastic musical that I think that was my first contact with David after he saw that. And I played one of the only successful presidential assassins. There's 10 of us in the show who try, and I'm one of the only successors. But it's maybe that's not a good thing to say.
Yeah, I don't know. Successor might not have been.
But we got into a big thing about 3 of us won, and the other 7 were losers, and so that was it became a big competition in the thing. But it's that thing of you can't look at the bigger picture. Because all we are human beings, and all we are representing human beings for you every night, and so we can't do anything but advocate for that person.
Mm-hmm. That's your job.
It's your job. It's the gig. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want the gig, then don't take it. And I'm sure there are people who say, you know what, I think that's going to be too much for me. And I think that I mean, you had said that you had spoken to an actor who played Richard III and said, I can never do that again.
I'm not going to do it again. He said it's too hard. He ended up with pneumonia. He said, I'm not going there. I'm not going there again.
Because the goal is to go there every night as deeply as possible, because you guys have paid the money and taken your time to come and see us. The goal is not to skate over anything. It's to go as deep as possible. And so... But that comes at a cost. It's true. I was telling these guys beforehand, when I was a young actor, I sort of would devour books and any actor who would discuss his process. And there was an actor who was in the original Sam Shepard play called Fool for Love, in which he fell in love and fell out of love every night. And he said the play could have gone on for 2 or 3 more years, but he said, I had to quit because I physically couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't. And he's an excellent actor, too. And so, obviously, he was going as deep as he could, but he could not physically fall in and out of love again one more time. So he had to just get out of it. But
I just want to, we're going to take a question, because we have lots of questions. But just on that topic, I'll do just a little call out to someone like Randy Hewson. I don't know if you've seen To Kill a Mockingbird. So I just want to say, in defense of Randy, he is not that person. You know, he's a kind, gentle, very open-hearted man who goes home at the end of playing that performance to his 2 beautiful children and his wife. You know, it costs a lot to tell that story. He is advocating and he is giving a voice to that man's journey in that particular play. And is there a cost to that? I would say sometimes, yes, there is. We have a question here. In popular culture, stage and screen artists are depicted as being so insecure that they constantly need to be told by all their fellow artists that everything they do is fabulously terrific. Is this true in reality, and can you speak to this? I mean, I could speak to this, but do you want to jump into that?
Go ahead, and I'll jump in.
Well, I would just like to say, the first thing that springs to mind is part of the gift. Part of the gift, I think, that David was talking about as creativity is every actor I've ever worked with probably was told numerous times in their childhood, don't be so sensitive. Just stop that. Just don't be so sensitive. You have to develop thicker skin. Don't be so sensitive. And actually, that is a gift that they have, that sensitivity, that ability to empathize. Maybe they have it in a higher quotient. I don't know, but that is a tenet of their craft, that ability to feel and to move towards something that isn't just theirs. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. But I would like to put anybody from the general population on the deck where they have to prove their worth every 3 weeks in an audition, every 6 weeks in an audition, where they're told that, you need to lose 5 pounds, you need to get something injected into your lips or your cheeks, or you need to work with this trainer, you need to do this, you need to study this, you need to do that, maybe you should try this. When that's part of their job. that constant. They don't have a desk job where, they have a pension and, and I know a lot of people nowadays don't have those jobs either. But the actual reality of their working life is, to come here for 9 months, 10 months is the longest gig in the country.
Well, I would say in addition to that, I mean, I think about my own job at the hospital. Once a year, I meet with my chief for a performance appraisal. And it's a pretty pro forma affair. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and it happens once a year, and then I get a letter about a week later saying, yes, you're reappointed to the medical staff. For performers like Steve, the word performance appraisal can happen twice a day.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Every night in the Rocky Horror
Twice
Show.
a day,
Absolutely.
the applause meter is moving, like on Queen for a Day, to provide you with feedback that most of us in our working lives do not experience with that frequency, with that intensity, and also, I would add, with that capriciousness.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think if you're in the business to get praise, and if you're in the business to be have that just blanketed on you, I don't see how that's the real thing. I think you have to be your own best critic, but I think that way madness lies if you just rely on, oh yes, they stood up for me today and they didn't. And I don't find that that's the case here, where there's a level of excellence that it's just actors who want to do their best work here. I don't see a lot of am I okay? And that, I mean, of course we all need to in that delicate rehearsal process, which, it'd be, I so wish that you guys could sometimes spend time in the rehearsal process and see what we do, because we talk about how hard it is and how delicate it is and how vulnerable it is and stuff. And it, to me, sometimes sounds like these are truly first world problems. I'm not digging ditches and I'm not serving burgers and stuff. I have a great job, but it's a hard job, and it gets harder every year, I think, because your bar continues to raise, and so yeah, I think the self-critic is important, and the self-critic, it's as important to be able to put him on hold as well. But this I don't know. I'm never very comfortable with open praise. Maybe that's just my low self-esteem or something, but I feel it. I so appreciate when people take the time to say that they liked the show and they liked what I've done in it, and I think that's so amazing that people would do that. But I don't crave it, and I don't seek it out, and I think some people do, and I think that maybe leads to not a very fulfilling career. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe they're happy as a clam to be told that everything they do is wonderful. And
Well, we often talk about that with reviews, don't we? We say to young actors, if you're going to read the reviews and believe the good ones, then does that mean you're also going to read the reviews and believe the bad ones? So, how do you measure your own work as an artist? Are you looking for that, validation from outside, or are you following your own sense of, yes, I did my show today, yes, I played as I wanted to play today. Yes, I met the goals that I wanted to meet today.
That's the thing, and then the praise from someone on the street who stops you is gravy to me, as opposed to just, oh my God, I need it. How was I today? I think you have to know how you were today, and even if it's conflicting, if you thought you had a terrible show and someone said I loved it, then that's fantastic, and that's also something you have to put in your back pocket, but. Yeah, the seeking of it is crazy.
Interesting question here. Is the fear of losing their creativity the reason that many artists resort to drugs and alcohol, or because they need a release from the parts that they play?
We were talking backstage about a book I just finished reading called The Trip to Echo Spring, which is a profile of 6 writers who had horrendous problems with drugs and alcohol, mainly alcohol, namely Hemingway, Fitzgerald, John Cheever, Raymond Carver, Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote. It really, I mean, lives, it almost killed each one of them, their problem with drink. And, you know, you can't find a single explanation. But I should say that when it comes to the problem of drink as affected these writers, people forget that alcohol use is problematic alcohol use is a highly heritable disorder. Mm-hmm. And so if you take one step back and look at the families of these individuals, you find a marked overrepresentation of alcohol abuse and frank alcoholism, which puts people in a vulnerable position. Mm-hmm. But it's not just about genetics. As they say, genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. So what are the environmental factors? Well, part of it is the culture of drinking that has existed historically. And Steve and I had a conversation about this a week ago, about, you know, you hear those stories from yesteryear in the theater of Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton barely being able to stand up. They were so intoxicated as they would walk out on stage. And I think these have become sort of romanticized notions of the intersect between drinking and being creative performers. And
Absolutely.
I suspect those days are largely gone.
Yes, I would say, and this is my 29th season, and over the time that I have been here, you know, if I reflect back on my first several seasons, I think that I would refer to it now, although I wouldn't have known to say it then, that there was a lot of self-medicating going on. But as time has marched on, and perhaps it is the discussion of mental illness that's happening in society at large, I find that younger artists are not, they do not wish that medication of any kinds, be it alcohol or any other drug, it's not the first thing that they reach for. And they're, in some cases, sometimes very hard on themselves if in fact they do need for a time to be on a medication. So that's really flipped in those 30 years that I've been here. That's really changed. I don't know if
I wonder if as you get older, I mean, I find as I get older, it's a double-edged sword, because I love the challenge, but the longer I stay here, I don't want to start to bore you guys. So I am quite daunted at the beginning of a season every year as to, okay, well, I moved like that last year. I talked like that last year. What am I going to do? It's still just me. So what do I do to entertain you guys? And then you just start. And for 3 months, you try one thing, you try another thing, and then there's occasionally a spark, and maybe, I mean, I've never drank only because I don't like the taste of it. It's never been a religious or a whatever thing. But I wonder, because I watch people worry more and worry more and worry more, and I wonder if alcohol or self-medication, as you so well put it, if that's some sort of, albeit false, sense of a way to be creative. But if you feel like the well is a bit dry, maybe that's a way to feel like, okay, well, this is how we'll get through this time. I don't know. I don't know. It's very interesting.
I mean, and there is just the practical reality that you finish a show at 11 o'clock at night, your adrenal system has been in high gear. You know, maybe you had a matinee, maybe your adrenal system's been, you know, really kicked into high gear since 11 o'clock in the morning. So you've been literally on an adrenal high for 12 hours. And then you go home and you have to, how do you unwind?
Yeah.
How do you? And I think, in the past, I think the pub, the bar was a place where people could definitely do that. Because, I mean, that is a real thing that is happening in the body. You don't expect that, you know, performance skier in the Olympics to come off that slope after winning that medal and just, go home and have a nap. And that's the same thing, I would say, for the actor. They have to go home and they have to find a way physically, mentally, emotionally to unwind themselves, to get themselves to a point where they can sleep, because tomorrow they're going to wake up and they're going to do it all over again.
And I think we take it for granted, too. I think we forget sometimes.
The cost of that?
I think we forget the cost of it, because it's all we do. And I think it has to be some sort of grand thing. I mean, Rocky Horror is terrifying to do in a great way. I don't want to, I don't ever want it to be sounding like I'm complaining, because I'm not. It was the hardest rehearsal process I've ever been through in my 25 years as an actor. It was because essentially I didn't have a scene partner, because I don't connect with anyone. I don't know if a lot of you guys have seen it or not, but I don't connect with a single person on stage. My scene partner is the audience, which will be different every single night, and will perhaps sometimes be rowdier, sometimes not. Perhaps we've had a drink, perhaps we haven't. But it is. So I had 14 chances. Our cast and creative team were so great with me to try to mimic what it would be like in the rehearsal room, but there was no way to do it. And so we had 14 previews, so I had 14 chances to get my learning curve up to what this show would be like. And I've never had to be more present in my life on stage. I've never had to. It's a fascinating thing, and it goes by like in a flash, because I'm so pumped after the show, and I do take that for granted, and I do, and I have had problems sleeping this year. It is, and I finally had to realize it's because of Rocky. It's because you are. There is such an overthinking that goes on. As I say, in a great way, but it's the way it is this year. Is that's simply the thing, and I have had to find ways to come down and to leave it, and then as you say, start it all over again, because that's the thing, is that, you know, this week alone we'll have 2 rehearsals, 9 shows, and this forum event. That's my week. So it's a big week to, and as I say, I'm not digging ditches. It's a fantastic job, but it's a lot this week. And so, you know, today we have the luxury of just an evening show, but it's Rocky. So it'll be an adventure again. So
This just goes back slightly. The year you played Uncle Ernie, did you find that acting in other productions help you keep your mental equilibrium?
that's a great question.
Especially in the rep situation. That is a great question.
I do love the rep situation, boy. You never do more than 4 a week or 5 a week, as opposed to 8 a week. The grueling pace of 8 shows, the same thing 8 a week, it's a very different animal to someone who was doing a Mervis show for a year and having to do that 8 times a week is a very, very different thing than us. And yeah, I do think that, because what was it? It was Fiddler on the Roof. So it was playing Laser Wolf, who was dark as well, but it wasn't dark in the way Ernie was. So it was, and there was a joy and a family feel to that was not nearly the dysfunctional family that our family and Tommy was, but in Fiddler that was just that feeling of community and that sense of it. So yeah, I would say it definitely had a big thing in helping equalize the thing. Yeah.
Right. David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Someone is wanting you to comment on the fact that maybe individuals will complain that medications to treat mental illness will dull or diminish their creativity, so they will choose to suffer rather than experience that dullness. Do you have any words of hope for people who would be choosing that or struggling with that?
Let me again take the example of bipolar disorder, for which the traditional mainstay of medication treatment has been the drug lithium. And lithium, which is a salt you may remember from the table of the elements in high school that you had to stare at, lithium was discovered in around 1859, but its role in medicine emerged in 1948 when a psychiatrist in Australia experimented with giving lithium to manic people. And prior to that, there was no really effective treatment for mania. And the results were dramatic, and lithium became a mainstay of treatment around the world very quickly. And so the question is, yes, but does that dull creativity? Well, fortunately, we actually have some research that addresses that question, looking at creative writers. and asking those creative writers who also happened to be on lithium for bipolar disorder what the impact was of lithium on their creativity. And for the majority of them, they said that lithium enhanced their creativity by taking them out of or preventing the plummeting into depression. And if you want to read about the impact of something like depression on creativity, you can look no further than William Styron's marvelous thin book called Darkness Visible, about his own experience as one of America's great writers with depression and how immobilizing it was on him. So there are some people who will say, yes, but if I'm on lithium, I don't get that slight buzz that I find juices me. And I can tell you there are some artists who will either lower their dose of lithium or go off it at various times. But it's a high wire act because it carries also the risks of getting ill again. Some people find some of the newer antidepressants to have an emotional numbing effect on them. And for artists, being in contact with their emotions is important. Being not overwhelmed by them is also important.
Absolutely.
So again, it can be a bit of a balancing act. And frankly, the art of medicine is working with patients around finding the sweet spot that allows people to functioning creative or non-creative capacities while still preserving their mental health.
So just as we're wrapping up, would you agree that there's less stigmatization about this subject, like as you work with artists? I mean, you know, at the festival, we would have specialists in place if you would, you know, tear your hamstring. We would have physiotherapists. We would have, you know, we have a connection with the Father Kennedy Clinic in London. And likewise, we have those connections too for mental health, therapists, psychiatrists, and so on. Do you think that overall in culture that gets a little bit easier? There's less fear about that for people to reach out to get the help that they need?
Yeah. Look, I've been at this for a while, so certainly when I was a young brunette like Steve, there was a lot more.
It's just a lot of love, I tell you.
There was a lot more stigma and silence. I mean, we're sitting here in an audience where I suspect every single person in this audience has someone that they care about in their family, in their community, who's experienced some form of mental illness.
Absolutely.
It's 1 in 5 Canadians every year, right? So we're talking about an extraordinarily common phenomenon that has been cloaked in silence in the way that cancer was 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we've moved way forward. And I think some of the efforts that Steve has championed here within the festival have helped open that door. And I think once the door is open, it's kind of hard to slam it shut again. And when you realize how common the experience is, that takes away some of the shame and some of the secrecy or the need for secrecy. So I think we're not at the finish line, but we're way further ahead.
Yeah, we're much further ahead. In terms, just approaching that as practically as we would if we were breaking our ankle or spraining our wrist.
Right.
Absolutely. We have to close. I've been given the 5-minute warning. So there's just one question because I am head of coaching. There is one question I'm going to close with because I can answer it really simply. This person asked me, are the actors in Julius Caesar mic'd? And my answer is, no, they're not.
So that was a great way to conclude today. Thank you, Janine, Steve, and David, for your stories and for your continued work and your advocacy to keep this discussion alive. We could keep going on and on, but we have to do Long Day's Journey into Night this afternoon, which is a whole nother story. The forum continues all season long with inspiring guests and opportunities to immerse yourself in our work. I encourage you to visit our website and see our exciting events that are coming up in September and October. And I'd like to thank you again to our panelists, to our audience here in the Studio Theatre, to our audience around the globe for being part of this discussion today. Thank you and have a great day.
Jump